Welcome, welcome, welcome. Can you hear me?
I can indeed.
Okay.
Good evening, Michelle, and welcome to
Good
everyone who's joined us
evening.
tonight.
And that includes in the chat room Dr. Karen Ritzenhoff, who was our first guest on October 14th when we did a sneak peek of this 12-week series. So, hi, Karen.
Hi, Dr. K.
uh, so like I said, we are doing a 12-week series that we are calling If America Fails, the Coming Tyranny. And we got started basically. Janice and I are both friends, are both fans of The Handmaid's Tale, both the book by Margaret Atwood, as well as the Hulu TV series. And the Hulu series has 4 seasons, and the last season, what did it end last summer, I think. And so that was a period where we were seeing so many troubling changes going on in the country day. And so much of what was happening in this TV series, this fictional story, was resonated so deeply. So we decided to put together this series, and tonight is actually episode 2, plus the sneak peek. And what we're doing basically is using the Handmaid's Tale story to reflect upon current events, current threats to American democracy. And so Janice, who's been producing talk radio programs for decades, and I have been producing um, book discussion groups. So we're collaborating on this community service, and we have gathered together a number of scholars who have a particular perspective on different themes in The Handmaid's Tale. There's a lot going on in the show. Of course, there's oppression of women, there's um, this kind of religious fundamentalism. There's the failure of the United States government, the democracy, there's civil war. There's a lot going on. And so we have invited a number of people with particular perspectives to help us kind of parse through what we're seeing. And I know for me, you don't really hear words like authoritarianism or totalitarianism or fascism in the show. Instead, what happens is you see the actions, you see the behavior, and I personally wanted to kind of um, give us a way of naming and labeling what we're seeing, because I'm not sure, that we're all necessarily seeing the same things. So that is why we're here. That is why we are gathered, and I welcome everyone. My name is
Michelle, let
Michelle
me add
Odom.
a couple of things, and thank you very much for being with us. And I'm so grateful to Michelle, who is the senior producer of the series, and the hard work that she has done in bringing us to this point, this episode 2. We have a website. It's If America Fails Live. And if you'd like more about the the book by Margaret, you can visit our website. And if you'd like to see recaps of the seasons of the Hulu production of if Maid's Tale, we have available at our website. We hope that you will subscribe tonight and get notifications about the next um, episodes of If America Fails, and that you will leave comments. If you have questions for our guest tonight, please feel free to leave comments in the, and we are monitoring the chat room as best as we can to try to get your questions and responses and comments to our guests. Um, Tonight's episode, we have the theme and lessons of this dystopian tale, reflecting on the aspects of how a cult mindset, we all know that we have been faced with the political aggression of a cult like political movement in this country. To also look at how we use film and images in movies and stories in movies to help us reflect on things going around us. So, our title tonight is American Democracy Under Siege: Cults, Cultures, and Religion. And again, we thank you very much for being with us, and we hope that this will be helpful for you to think through the issues of how we always say that there are those of you out there who say, oh, this can't last long. This will go away. It'll be a short time and then all of it will go back to normal. And we ask the question, can it happen here? And then we follow up that question with, are you sure? Because if you look at world history, where democracies have failed, where they have fallen to crisis and fallen out of the societal principles, we that it can happen here. And so we hope that this series will assist you in looking at the political realities of a failed U.S. state. Michelle, thank you.
Okay, so joining us tonight are uh, two people. Reverend Dr. Susan K. Williams Smith, who is the founder and director of Crazy Faith Ministries in Columbus, Ohio, and Dr. Cynthia Ann Baron, who is a professor of theater and film at Bowling Green State University, also in Ohio. And that happened purely by coincidence. Uh, both of these women are authors. If you go to our website, If America Live, there are loads of posts about of these guests and details on their background and the books that they've written. So we're going to start tonight some comments by Dr. Bain, who wants us to call her Cynthia. And I will give you the short story on her bio. Dr. Cynthia Ann Baron, as I said, is Associate Professor in Theater and Film at Bowling Green State University, where she researches and teaches authors scholarly books and articles on subjects related to the discipline, and provides keynote speeches and other presentations at conferences, both domestically and internationally. Her research and teaching interests include American independent cinema, screenwriting, taste formation, censorship, food studies, women's cinema, and actor training, stardom, and screen performance, among other subjects. She has taught courses on intersections between the film media industry, national security, and cultural moments such as the Cold War and the Vietnam era. Some other courses Dr. Barron teaches are American independent cinema, Hollywood, censorship, and American culture, and performance in theater in the Americas. Most recently, she published Acting Indie, Industry Aesthetics and Performance with Yanis Zumakis, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, which illustrates the many ways that actors contribute to American independent cinema and analyzes industrial developments. Modern Acting, The Lost Chapter of American Film and Theater, 2016, which in part highlights women's key contributions to American film and theater. And she wrote a book in 2015 on Denzel Washington. That's the one I want to hear about, where Barron traces the star's persona and impact on mainstream society. Current book projects include Recasting White Genres, Race, Ethnicity, and Performance in Contemporary Film and Television, Intersecting Aesthetics, Literary Adaptations, and Cinematic Representations of Blackness with co editor Charlene Register, and Imprisonment, Representation in Global Film and Media with co editor Karen Ritzenhoff, who's in our chat room tonight. She is co chair of the Society for Cinema and Media Studies Caucus on Class and has participated in events such as the Rethinking Realist Acting Conference in New York and the Acting in Film Conference in Potsdam. Welcome, Dr. Barron. Uh, and at this time, you have the floor.
Well, thank you so much. I'm really honored to be here. I wish our topic were more cheerful, but it's good to talk about stuff. Um, I'm going to talk a lot about the intersection of race and the tyranny of religion. And partly I'm just going to, I don't want to talk about it unless we get into it in questions, but certainly watching The Handmaid's Tale, a lot of it really struck home because I grew up with white supremacists. You know, if you look at me, I mean, I'm like 99% white. There's no there's no question about that. And all of the people that I was around were both extremely interested in white, maintaining their white privilege. And they all did it and do it under the guise of religiosity. So there's just a lot. I don't know. The whole project touched a lot of nerves. Anyway, but I want to stick with start off with Margaret Atwood's observations about The Handmaid's Tale. And in the introduction to one of the recent paperback editions, and it's something that she published in 2017, She responds to sort of ongoing questions about, is The Handmaid's Tale an anti-religious rant or something? And she says absolutely not. But it is against religion as a front for tyranny, and I think that that's a really important topic for us to explore. One of her other questions was that she sought, that it had been ongoing and that she sought to address was, was this a prediction? And she said, no, it was never meant to be a prediction, but in 2017, it certainly feels that it certainly felt like it was a prediction, and I think maybe in 2022 it feels even more of a prediction. Um, and, I don't know if folks listen to the NPR podcast Throughline. I would recommend it to anybody. And one of the recent episodes was about autocracy. And one of the points was that, the big lie about the election being stolen is really just a mask for saying that only white people who are interested in a white supremacist state should be allowed to vote. I mean, it's very troubling. Anyway, so one of the things that I've been reading in sort of preparing for and thinking about this evening is material from the group that is involved in litigation against the encroachments against the separation of church and state. It's called the Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. And one of the points in their recent newsletter is that if you really, if you had to talk about what's happening in 2022, what you'd say is that there is a thriving and emboldened Christian nationalist movement that is just determined to push through the idea and to enact policies that are all in support of the idea that the idea that the U.S. was founded as a white Christian nation. So I think that's just so much to unpack. I mean, that's just insane. I think it's one of the things that's useful about groups like Americans United is they will track down what's going on, not just in the courts, but also in the schools. And one of the books that they reviewed recently is called Hijacking History: How the Christian Right Teaches History and Why That Matters. And the three of the main points that you learn in history is that it's not just that it was a Christian nation, but that also that capitalism is God's way of rewarding and punishing people, so that poverty is the result of personal sin and not systemic inequality. So charity is unbiblical, and it will just lead to socialism and Satanism. I'm going to come back to some sort of book burning activity, but I just it's chilling. So at any rate, I think it's just absolutely fascinating that we know that Margaret Atwood was interested in grounding her speculative fiction in history, and that she was particularly thinking about regimes that were had secret police and so forth. And she says, well, of course, there are many totalitarian regimes that have some sort of religious trappings, but her insight into the U.S. Into U.S. history, I think, was so on target, because she said, well, of course, the only way it would be possible for a totalitarian regime to take hold in the US is if it involved and depended upon religious symbols. And it would have to be a theocracy, which is, a system in which, the government is ruled by men in the name of God, or a God, or something. And that is such a profound and clear insight. That I find that chilling, and I think all that really is an important reason to think about how religion has functioned in the U.S. There's I don't want to, I could spend like 5 hours trying to, how did we get here, talking about that. But I do think there are a couple of key things to think about. And one is that, again, taking the lead from Margaret Atwood, in the marvelous and just chilling historical notes section that's at the end of the Handmaid's Tale, there's the comment that no new system can impose itself upon a previous one without incorporating many of its elements, and Gilead was no exception. Racist fears provided some of the emotional fuel that allowed the Gilead to take over to succeed as well as it did. Okay, so that's a lot to take in. So the historical notes point us to the fact that one of the pieces that is absolutely essential for Gilead to be able to succeed was that it imposed itself, it worked itself in and built on the existing racism, and that it would use the trappings of religion to put over the project. And why would all of this why does this dovetail so neatly in U.S. history, and why is it plausible in the reality of the book? And it has to do with the fact that while the founding fathers may have ostensibly wanted there to be a separation of church and state, because they could see how religion could be used to disable them from their power. From the very beginning, the white settler colonists used religion as a way to differentiate themselves from indigenous peoples, and as a justification for genocide. And also from the very beginning, it was part of the religion, was part of the way that white slaveholders would differentiate themselves from their non-human property. And in the Jim Crow era, for example, now let's just fast forward a couple of centuries. In the Jim Crow era, it's actually the evangelicals who are the first to mobilize and most strongly enforce segregation. Again, fast forwarding, if you think about whiteness and religion, even among Americans who now can all pass for white. There are periods of time in the 18th and 19th centuries when, for example, the Protestant Catholic division made it impossible for Catholics, for Italian and Irish Catholics to be completely white. And so there was the Protestant Catholic, white Protestant, not completely white Catholic division. And then once we move into the mid 20th century, and particularly in the from the post civil rights period forward, you have the opposition between white evangelicals and everybody else who's not part of God's plan. As of 2021, there are, 36% of the population identifies as evangelical and as white, Republican, and Christian. And so this is this really strong sort of close package of identity markers sets these folks at odds with everyone else who is ruining America as they see it and as they think it should be. Part of this is interestingly tied up with education and funding for education. In the mid 20th century, in 1949, there was a TV debate: should federal funds for education be used for public schools only? Because there hadn't always been federal funding. And so this was a topic of debate. And in 1950, when there was legislation proposed that there would be federal aid for education, the Catholic clergy attacked the idea because it excluded private religious institutions. That was later withdrawn, but that gives you it's a bit of a precursor to what then has continued. 1954, the Brown versus Board of Education decision was a key factor in sparking the rise of the contemporary white evangelical movement, because what it did was it prompted whites to, in order to avoid segregation, they set up their own private religious schools which were open only to whites. And they set up voucher plans so that there would be, this was, viable. And so this continues, it sort of works its way through as sort of a convention. And then if those of you who are as old as me will recall that the 1970s started to be a period in which tax issues and tax exempt issues are a real big deal. Everybody wants to have a tax exempt status. And certainly the private religious schools wanted to have tax exempt status. And there was a Supreme Court decision, Green versus Connolly in 1971, which denied tax exempt status to private religious schools. And this actually sets off a whole series of chain events, which becomes framed as an attack on religious freedom. I'm sorry, it's really hard to say this. it's straight. It's hard to say this straight faced. Okay, so it's allegedly an attack on religious freedom, and it mobilizes certainly voters in the South, where there or in areas where there were a lot of private religious schools. But it wasn't mobilizing voters to closely identify with the Republican Party, and so throughout the 1970s, Republican strategist Paul Weyrich kept searching for an issue that would mobilize voters and make them sort of vote for Republicans on sort of a package of issues where maybe it wasn't the tax initiatives or the business initiatives. They would vote for those, but actually what would attract them to this platform and this was something that was sort of this was tested and it did work, it was eventually, and this is later in the 70s, that it was finally the abortion issue that provided the fig leaf for the interest in keeping religious freedom for these white supremacist schools. Sorry, just have to call them what they are. So 1979, Weyrich forms the moral majority, gets Reagan elected, and then the coalition that is formed in the 1970s is the one that it continues to build and build and build, and it is that coalition that actually leads, for example, to Trump's election. To go back to the guru, Margaret Atwood, in the historical notes, one of the points that's made is that the reason that Gilead could actually, there could be an overthrow of the Democratic Republic in the U.S. is that there were plummeting death rates of Caucasians, which then sparked the racists' fears of losing control of the country. And so part of what the historical notes are referencing, and what Atwood's book is about, is this period in the late 1970s, early 1980s, where there was a profound concern that there were that the birth rate among whites was not as high as it was during the baby boom period. So yeah, it is true. There was a drop in 1955. We're talking about a rate of 24%. And then it goes down into 65. In 1965, it's 18%, and 1975, it's 13%, and then it just sort of keeps hovering around 13 or 14 or 15%. So this is even, the concerns in the late 70s and the early 1980s. This is even before there are a lot of projections about the rising Hispanic populations in the U.S. But the idea that there weren't as many, white women at home doing nothing but having children was really terrifying for people who wanted to maintain control of everything in the US. And so they were that it is plausible that they were willing to just give up everything to secure and save their white supremacist status. I find Atwood's story absolutely plausible. So I don't know if that's, I mean, of course, I don't know. It's chillingly plausible. And so there's just a few things that I wanted to finish up with by mentioning that have been going on in just the last couple of months. So, for example, if one were wondering, well, do I just think that Christian nationalists are on the move? Well, no, there actually are. If you just trace a few of the recent court cases. So, for example, or just activities, let's just look at education. So in December of last year, the Starkweather School District Superintendent, sent an email to the North Dakota Council of Education Leaders, to that list, saying that it's time to turn back from godless, corrupt work, left-wing ideology, and turn back to the devout Christian-centered republic that the founders envisioned. Now, I don't think that the founders envisioned a devout, Christ-centered republic. I do think that they envisioned a white supremacist republic, but I don't know that it was devout or Christian in the way that this person imagines. In September of last year, in Goddard, Kansas, there were 29 books that were removed from circulation. Just a few of the titles: The Handmaid's Tale and the Testaments by Margaret Atwood, Toni Morrison's The Bluest Eye, and Fences by playwright August Wilson. In November, the education officials reversed the decision, but they gave parents access to the titles of the books their children were reading. There's a pending case at the U.S. Supreme Court, Carson versus Macon, that would extend taxpayer funding to private religious schools in Maine. So in Maine, not all of the school districts or school areas have public secondary schools. And so in those cases, what they do is they pay for students to go to private schools, but they have to be approved private schools, and they have to be non-sectarian private schools. And so 3 families who've sent their kids to private religious schools are claiming that this law violates their violates the equal protection clause of the Constitution. So we'll have to see what happens in that case. There's also the Kennedy versus Bremerton School District. And this is where the Supreme Court of the United States has agreed to hear the arguments. This is an assistant football coach at a private high school in Washington State. He, up through 2015, was having prayers with players and students at the 50-yard line after every football game. And so the school stopped it, and when he wouldn't, or they tried to stop it, and when they wouldn't stop it, they put him on leave, and then they didn't rehire him. And so he's suing the school district, and so the Supreme Court is going to hear this case. It is also getting ready to decide a case. They just heard it this week, Shurtleff versus Boston. And it looks like they are going to decide in favor of Christian nationalist Hal Shurtleff. This is a case where Shurtleff petitioned the Boston City Hall to fly a Christian flag on Constitution Day in 2017, and he wanted to use that day to commemorate the historic and social contributions of the Christian community to the city of Boston. And they denied it because they are trying to maintain a separation of church and state. But it looks like the Supreme Court is going to decide in Shurtleff's favor. And just to sort of cap this off, I just want everybody to know, if you don't already, that Shurtleff is affiliated with Camp Constitution, whose mission is to enhance the understanding of our Judeo-Christian moral heritage and train leaders in the freedom fight against the abuses and perversions that have brought our nation and economy so far down. So, with those words, I'm going to close. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much. That's a lot to think about. Um, when you started off talking about um, your background growing up in a white supremacist family, it reminded me that this TV show to me doesn't deal directly with the topic of white supremacy. And I'm wondering if there are elements of it that you see or don't see in the Handmaid's Tale.
Well, the book definitely does clarify that there are only white handmaids, and that all people of color are sent to the colonies. It's very clear. Even the film that came out in the 90s, is it 91? They actually show that that a scene of the people of color being, separated off and sent away.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that, I really like the TV series. I think it does amazing things. I even like the later seasons. I like the fact that it shows that people get really messed up in an imprisoned situation. And 1990, okay. And but I am a little uncomfortable with the way the the Hulu series sort of soft pedals the racism. Um, there are a few comments like, oh well, this commander's wife does not want to have a black handmaid. There
Mhm.
are, a few remarks,
Mhm.
um, uh, but that's about it. And so, and I guess part of the reason that it doesn't really, the questions of race do not come to the fore is that mainstream media is so white. It's just like, well, yeah, most of the actors are white because most of the actors on TV are white.
Mhm. Mhm.
I think that's part of what happens. It's
Mhm.
already
Mhm.
naturalized.
Mhm.
That's that's my 2 cents. I don't know. What do you think?
Um, it's just curious to me that you don't see it because I believe, as you indicated in your presentation, that um white supremacy, was certainly at the foundation of what the founders of this country wanted. Um, but I didn't see them as particularly religious either. It seems clear that um, the religious rhetoric, um, was just a tool um, to get people to go along with their power scheme. Um,
Exactly. Which is
and
why it seems like just a little hop, skip, and a jump to Gilead.
right,
You know?
right, right. So it's like if we don't, I mean, we're sitting here today, um, having failed um, to change the filibuster, know, so that we could maybe protect democracy for a change just this week. Um,
Well,
and it
yeah, and
just seems
also,
like if
tied up with this, one of the things, Trump recently, uh, and this is not the first time he said it, but he, points out that, if people are allowed to vote, if this really were a democracy and there wasn't this incredibly screwed up electoral college and there wasn't this system where, you know, uh, urban in settings have essentially fewer representatives, in government because of the way the Senate is set up. Um, you know, he, Trump and others have said that if there actually were a democracy, no Republican would ever, ever be elected, ever again. And so they
Mhm,
have
mhm,
to mess with the rules. They have to
mhm,
make sure that there will never be fair voting.
mhm,
Otherwise, they will lose their power. And they've so mishandled it. They've been so rotten with it that they assume that the next person along the line is going to act just like them.
right, right,
I'm not very
right.
optimistic, am I?
And that and well, but that's why we need to talk about it. And it just feels to me like if we don't get explicit about the white supremacy that fuels so much of this attack on women's rights, attack on our democracy, attack on our educational system, then we're just going to keep coming back to these
Mm-hmm.
same, like you go into the 1970s. I remember the moral majority and Phyllis Schlafly and all of that nonsense. And,
Right.
but to be here in 2022 is outrageous.
It is.
Do
It
you think
is.
that, do you think? do you think that the film, that The Handmaid's Tale, is effective at helping viewers see the contradictions in the religious veneer, um,
I,
or
it's hard to say. I mean, to me, it's a like glaring, because I lived it. You know, I mean, I know how the two go together.
Mhm, mhm.
Um, and so to me, it's terrifying,
Yes,
because
yes,
it's not fiction.
right,
It's documentary.
right,
Um,
right.
and so the fact that just the way things like I mean, of course, as any woman gets distressed listening to the comments about, well, we're going to call this, these uh, monthly rape sessions, we're going to call them ceremonies. It'll sound better.
Mhm,
That's
mhm.
good marketing. I mean, I'm distressed about that as a woman, as a human being, and that's exactly where the religion becomes this system to support power.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Michelle, I have a question I'd like to pop in.
Please
And
do.
Cynthia, thank you for your presentation. That was so revealing, and especially in the context of history of oppression. But my question to you as professor of film and theater, and having written so prolifically about how film impacts and what it imports into our society, let me ask you whether or not, or what you believe that the role of film has been to provide an undergird for the propaganda, uh, especially in the last 30 years, about the role of women, the role of class, the role, how race works in this country. Um, I can't remember the film, The Birth of a Nation, The Birth of a Nation, that it is what I recall the original film of propaganda to set up a class and white supremacist system in this society. So, what do you think the role of film um, and theater
Yeah,
is
yeah,
played in assisting us to come to this place where we are the democratic society is in Christ?
um, I can't. Uh, where it's hard to talk about the last 20 years, 20, 30 years.
Hmm.
Um, it's hard because there's been such a fragmentation of of how media is delivered and experienced. So those of us who are watching The Handmaid's Tale are not the same people who are spending, I don't know, hours watching porn, say, or hours watching uh, fart joke comedies, or um, any of the action films that consistently other whether it's other human beings, whether it's women, whether it's people of color in the U.S., whether it's people outside the U.S. um, you know, always fighting threats. I mean, there's a lot of work on how The rise of action cinema has made the U.S. much more militaristic, and it fits into the military-industrial complex and all of that, which again is part of the white empire's, long-term objective. Yeah, it's complicated because there are also there's I've been spending all my time recently watching things like East Los High, which is a series. It's all Latinx series about teenagers and where I first grew up in East Los Angeles, where my parents pulled me out of there and moved me to a different, moved the family to a different part of Southern California because they didn't want their kids growing up around kids of color. Um, so I have it's complicated. There are ways that certain types of mainstream filmmaking certainly support the empire, which is going to be a white empire. Um, there's also countercurrents too. Um,
Mm-hmm.
so I can only give a mixed answer. This is sort of an aside. I was thinking about the birth of a nation for various reasons this week, and it's not just the U.S. at the very beginning of cinema that did this. I mean, if you look at something like Trip to the Moon, which is a 1903 French film, it is a support of the French Empire. So the white scientists fly to the moon, and they easily conquer the moon people, who all it's sickening. They are all they're wearing masks that are, in quotes, African. The moon people have spears. Uh, they hop around like frogs or monkeys, and they are easily killed by the white the French explorers. So that's just one example. The same sorts of things happen, um, with other early cinemas. So whatever white, Anglo-European, power had the technology, everything was framed in terms of white supremacy. And there's other stuff that's about white power in early cinema, uh, even beyond the birth of a nation. The first censorship was all designed to make sure that the fight of the Great White Hope, the loss, you know Jack Johnson's victory, boxing victory over the Great White Hope
Yeah.
in
Yeah.
the well, that it was not the first major censorship in U.S. cinema history, was to ensure that as few people as possible saw that footage.
Yeah. Well, we really appreciate you embellishing our understanding of how this story, how this book, what we see in the images and the narrative TV show uh, informs us in a way to strike both our imagination and our inquiry, comparative inquiry, into what we see that's on around us. And Michelle, thank you for such a wonderful summary and guiding of this discussion. Cynthia Baron, we'll definitely have to have you back because I do want to talk to you about some of these films that I believe um, they're so mainstream, but there's so much violence and how violence normalized through film.
Actually, Cynthia is scheduled to be back with us on, I think it's March 10th for our discussion
Wow,
on
great,
class.
great, great, great. Cynthia, thank you so very much.
Thank
And
you.
Michelle, we're going to not take a break in this episode. And I'm going to take the time to introduce our next guest, who is Reverend Dr. Susan Smith. When I met her many years ago, one of the things drew me to her was one of her quotes. She said, "People of crazy faith have changed the world." And she was challenged to follow their lead. She is an ordained minister, pastor, musician, writer, activist, and mother of two living in Columbus, Ohio. And I must say, she is a dog mother, where she serves as the founder and executive director of Crazy Faith Ministries. And if you'd like to know more about it, it's crazyfaithministries.org. It's a non traditional church with faith ministries providing outreach and services for homeless people, services for children of incarcerated parents, and voter education and registration, among many other services to her community. Burned out by traditional ministry, Reverend Smith believes church is not a place where you go, it is something you do. She's a prolific writer and author of several books. She began her career as a newspaper reporter in Baltimore, and she has published 6 books, including the Forgive Who, The Struggle to Obey God's Awful Command, Crazy Faith, Ordinary People, Extraordinary Lives, the Book of Jeremiah, the life and ministry of Jeremiah, Reverend Jeremiah A. Wright Jr., and Rest for Justice, Seeking Soul. Rest for the Justice Seeking Soul. Reverend Susan Smith, it is so wonderful to share a microphone, and now we have a video with you once again. Thank you for joining us at If America Fails.
Thank you for inviting me. It's good to be here.
Well, you know, when Michelle and I talked about who we needed to talk with about the role of religion in what we are seeing in our country, not only the role that is played negatively, but the role that is played positively. And certainly you are an icon in making church and religion work for justice and peace. And you are a freedom seeking sister. So we thought that you would be the perfect person. I'm going to ask you to make some, or do an overview of your thoughts about cults, culture, and religion in reflection on The Handmaid's Tale, the story, and the potential for democracy failing in the United States. And we thank you so much for being with us.
Thanks. And you're teasing me about being a dog mom, but I am a dog mom. I have a husky and a German shepherd, and they have a bedtime and it's past, so that you might see them jumping up or, doing something silly because they're also very spoiled. So I apologize. I don't apologize. I mean, but those are my babies now in the house. But I'm glad to be here. I'm honored to be here. Thank you really for the invitation. It's always an honor to be invited for something. And I just need to say, when you said it was about The Handmaid's Tale, that we were going to be talking about The Handmaid's Tale, I shivered in my bones because you know what? I couldn't watch it. I mean, I watched it for a while, and then it was just too real. Dr. Cynthia Baron said that, for her it was like a documentary, and I've obviously not lived in a white supremacist family, but I've certainly lived in a white supremacist world. And when I saw that, the more I saw, the more it just made my skin just crawl. And I think the very last episode that I watched is when there was the guy and the girl had gotten pregnant or something had happened. I don't remember. They were not supposed to be together. This girl and this boy, this young girl and boy, and they were punished. They were made to jump off some ledge into the water with ropes or something. And that was it. That was it. You know why? Because when you read history and you read how governments do fail, how governments slip from democracy into autocracy. Um, People in government, people in power do not have a whole lot of respect or regard for human life. They do not care. And so when I watched that happen, I just said, okay, that's enough. That's enough. It was already bad enough to see the rape sessions. It was already bad enough. And I was just, I think, coming to the understanding um, that white supremacy is not just about race, but it's about sex as well, sex and gender. And so to see those young women subjected to being raped by those men, it made my stomach turn. I literally. And so when you said we're going to do Handmaid's Tale, I said, "Oh my gosh, I don't know if I want to do it." And I picked up the book and I reviewed some of it, and then I put it back down. I just put it down because it is real. It is very real. And what Dr. Barron said about, white supremacy being at the core of all of this, and white people, primarily white people uh, in general, but white men, powerful, wealthy white men in particular, being afraid of losing their power and doing anything to hold on to it, is right where we are. Right where we are right now. Right before the 2016 election, I was in Germany, and I was just studying how I was very uneasy about the things that I was hearing the former president say and how he was saying it. I was even more disturbed by the fact that so many people were rallying behind him or around him. I was just floored, and it scared me. And so I I went and I read stuff about how that government failed, and I went through the museums, and we went to a concentration camp, and I went to all of that, and I I just shuddered. I just shuddered because as Hitler came to power, obviously he didn't care about Jewish people, but he didn't care about a whole bunch of people because he was a cult leader. I'm reading a book now by Stephen Hassan, Hassan, called The Cult of Trump. It's explaining Hassan, who used to be a member of a cult, is explaining how cults work and what are the characteristics of cult leaders. They're narcissistic, they're malignant narcissists, they are insecure, they are cruel, they don't have empathy, and we're seeing all of that. And you know what? We have been moving toward where we are for a very long time. Dr. Barron said she wasn't. I think she said she wasn't sure if the founders wanted it to be a religious nation. They were very explicit in saying this was not a Christian nation. So every time I hear people say this is a Christian nation, I think you haven't read your history. They were very explicit about this not being a Christian nation. Many of them, I mean, most of the founding fathers and the signers of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, they had grown up in churches like Episcopalians and all that kind of stuff. But they were not into Jesus. They believed that Jesus existed, but they were not did not accept the metaphysical parts of Jesus, all the miracles and all of that. They just rejected all of that. They really were about money and power. And they really were about founding this nation as a white nation. That's what they really wanted. I don't know that they verbalize their racial hatred, but they certainly didn't have any respect for people of African descent, as most of them were owners of enslaved. I mean, they enslaved people, so they were not interested in the humanity of people of African descent. They weren't interested in the humanity of indigenous Americans. They definitely were not interested in the humanness and the worth of women. So we've been moving. We've called ourselves a democracy, but we've never really been a democracy. But we have been moving toward this total breakdown of whatever the heck it is that we have had to this place where we are now, where we're close. I'm calling it fascism. Fascism thrives on exacerbating the separations and the tensions between people, where a democratic republic thrives on people being together, working in brotherhood and sisterhood, in community. That's not what fascism does. So they like to keep people separate because that helps them keep their power. When we're at each other's throats, and they can maintain their power. And the plantation economy is something that existed when people were brought here and they were enslaved, but it still exists. Capitalism makes its money off of the backs of cheap labor. Cheap labor. That's why so many people are suffering from poverty in the present day. And so, when I watch Handmaid's Tale, I just said, "Gosh, can we just not look at this? Can we just because it's like seeing, for me, it was like seeing what was happening in real time. Um, the um, the whole uh, the whole thing against women, um, the people who have have been kind of fomenting the development of this whole Christian nationalist movement have been resentful of feminism and the women's movement from the time it began. Um, they have resented women stepping out of their place. One of the things that the leaders of these oligarchic, plutocratic, autocratic governments, they like people to be in their place. They think that the people, white men, should be in their place. If a black man has some money, he can be up there too. But they really do want the men to be in power, primarily wealthy white men. And the women are supposed to just kind of stay in their place, like black people are supposed to stay in their place. And so it they've never been in favor of the women's movement and women's, and definitely not of the movement of people who are not heterosexual, cisgender white men. They don't want all that. So all this, the rights for LGBTQIA people, and the disabled, they're not in favor of any of that. And I think what is happening, and I think I saw this in Handmaid's Tale as well, is that so many people who are rooting for this autocratic development, this delving of our government into this autocratic thing. So many people who are supporting that don't even realize that they're going to be part of the oppressed group as well. Only a very few number of people are going to be, free and easy. They're People don't realize it's the mentality. It's like, and I'm not going to talk long because it's late. I got to put my dogs to bed. But this mentality um, of, of 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 superiority is going to kill a lot of people. A lot of people. I'll never forget reading about the story when the Austrians. This was during the time of Hitler, and he marched into Austria, and all the people were rooting for him. And then after he got into Austria, and then and Austria fell to the Germans, he started slaughtering people in Austria. People don't realize, because the only thing that matters to these people who are trying to be in power is money and power, money and power, money and power. So that these people didn't like the women's movement. They don't like public education. Dr. Baron was exactly right. That Board of Education got people ticked off. They did not want their kids to go to school with little black children. And so so it kills me when they talk about law and order. Law and order only applies to a certain group of people. They don't have to follow the law. So if there's a law that's passed even by the Supreme Court that they don't like, they just ignore it, which is proven by the fact that after Brown v. Board of Education, that, like Dr. Barron said, they just shut the schools down. And then they wanted federal funds, public funds, to support the schools that they created. And then they lost their funding, and that then spurred the whole abortion, the anti-abortion thing. But Handmaid's Tale is like, opening the book, and you see it's just too real. It's palpable. It's palpable reality. It's like right here with us. And so I I I don't know. I don't know. And the whole religion thing, so everybody's saying Christian nationalists. I wish people would stop saying Christian nationalists. You can say religious nationalists, but you cannot be a Christian unless you do what Jesus says. You cannot be a Christian unless you follow the gospel, right? I mean, if I'm a Jewish person, I follow the Torah. If I am a Muslim, I follow the Quran. If I am a Christian, I follow the gospel of Jesus. The gospel, not even the whole Bible, but the gospel. If you're going to call yourself a Christian, you got to follow what Jesus said. And these people who call themselves Christian nationalists are in no way following the gospel. In fact, many of them have just ignored the gospel altogether, and that's been proven. And they have kind of uh, just kind of denigrated the whole biblical image they have of Jesus the Christ. These people, and I call them religious nationalists. I will not call them Christian nationalists, but they talk about Jesus and they say he's too effeminate. Um, uh, uh, Jerry Falwell Sr., now gone, he protested. I think it was in the 70s, and he said, the whole image of Jesus is erroneous. He wasn't like that. He wasn't like soft like that. Jesus was a he-man. That's a quote. He said Jesus was a he-man. They're very into this very hyper masculine, toxic masculine image of Jesus the Christ, which is not supported in the Gospels, and so. Um, so and I read Handmaid's Tale, and they're using all this language, blessed be, and everything is in it. It's not Christianity. It's an ideology that they're calling Christianity. It's an ideology that they have made into a theology, but it is not the theology of the Christian Bible, of the gospel. And so I'm watching this. I'm telling you, I'm watching it, and I tremble in my boots because we are right there. We are right there, and people don't realize it. Michael Flynn said, talking about freedom of religion or religious freedoms, and he has said that he doesn't, he thinks that there ought to be just one religion in the United States, and that religion is this religious nationalist thing that they're calling Christian nationalism, a religion that is devoid of Jesus the Christ. That's what they want. People don't realize it, and you know what? In my mind, it's like America is acting like people act like sometimes when they live in gated communities. You live in a gated community, you go in, the gate opens and you ride your car in and the gate closes, and you think that you are immune from anything bad happening, but that's not the case. And so America is like living in a gated community, and Americans, I think, for the most part, think like, oh, it can't happen here. It can't happen here. It is happening here, and has been happening since. Um, oh gosh, since like after World War II, at least since after World War II. The people who people, conservatives, did not like the New Deal. Dr. Baron was right. They wanted the wealthy. They want the wealthy to thrive, and they don't think that government is supposed to take care of the masses. That's all the way totally anti-Christian, because Jesus really did take care of the masses. They don't think that. They think, some of them do think, that Jesus really came to protect and bolster and lift up and support the powerful and the wealthy. That's what they believe. And so they have been angry. There's a book by H.W. Brands called Traitor to His Class. And H.W. Brands talked about how the wealthy white people were furious with Franklin Delano Roosevelt. Furious, even though he saved the country, by creating all these jobs with the New Deal and all that, but they were furious with him, and they have been fighting. First, they were angry because of the loss of the Civil War, and then they were angry because of the New Deal. So they've been working and marching and working and marching and organizing and planning for many, many years, and they're right at the cusp. And the question is then, what are we going to do about it? Are we going to take our heads out of the sand and see what's going on and decide to do some work to combat it? Or are we just going to sit, in our little saucers and make believe that America is this land of the free and home of the brave and everybody is just like really good to each other? And are we going to do that? Because if we continue to do that, autocracy is going to swallow us up. So that's why when I watched The Handmaid's Tale, I just got really nervous. And when I started listening to it again and reading it again in preparation for tonight, I got nervous all over again. So that's all I want to say. I don't want to talk too long because but that's just kind of like an overview.
Well, thank you so much. And as always, you get to the shaft of the harvest. And one of the questions that I have for you, and it's been burning in my head for the last week, waiting for you to join us, is to what extent is the body of Christian institutions in this country going to begin to take on the issues of the rising autocracy? And Michelle always brought us a new language, anocracy, which is a weird kind of combination of democracy and authoritarianism. What would be, I want to ask you about decency and protection that the Christian institutions in this country are willing to bring to these questions, especially when you see the way in which Christianity, as you just outlined, has been so defigured in the of the Handmaid's Tale, and also the depiction by Margaret Atwood in the book.
Well, Christianity does not have a good history when it comes to standing up against the rich and the powerful. Christian churches have been, I think, bedfellows of the government from the very beginning. I would call us a theocracy, or if it's not a complete theocracy, it's some whatever slash government slash theocracy is. But church and state have been in bed together from the very beginning, and Christian churches have benefited from the government as long as there is money involved. If Christian churches, or Buddhist temples or whatever, can get money from the government, money is more important to people than is God. People are just worried about how they're going to live in this capitalistic world. So, for example, during the civil rights movement, I think that there were probably a lot of Caucasian ministers who were against what was going on, but they wouldn't speak up. They would not speak up, Janice. They would not speak up because they would lose their jobs. There's this book called Born of Conviction, and there are, I think, 9 white pastors in the South wrote this letter to the newspaper, and they were saying that segregation was wrong, and that fighting for civil rights was the will of God. Well, when a lot of the Southern preachers were saying that fighting for civil rights was a sin, and that if you fought for civil rights, you were threatening your own salvation. So these guys decided that they were going to band together and they were going to do this letter, and they were going to make a moral stand. And say that segregation was wrong. It was not the will of God. And they, of course, they paid for it. They got run out of town. They lost their churches. And because people have always been afraid of what the government and money will do to them, the government has been able to keep a lid on them. And so they don't speak out because, at the end of the day, if you're a pastor and that's your sole source of income, you got to pay your mortgage. You got to eat. And people have been afraid of that. There was a man named Reverend Marsh, and he wrote this sermon called "The Sorrow of Selma." And when I was doing the research for my book, I came across that, and I thought, "Oh God, this is good. This is good," because here's a white Southern pastor who's going to talk about how awful it was for the government to beat these people who were trying to go across the bridge, the Edmund Pettus Bridge, so they could march to Montgomery to make a stand for voting rights. And his sermon actually was he was voicing his hesitation. He did not know. He did not know. He was not sure if fighting for civil rights was the right thing to do. This was a Christian minister. And so that's the history of churches in this country.
Mhm.
I think there probably are a whole lot more pastors and churches, maybe, but pastors specifically, who have wanted to speak out against some of the stuff that's going on, but they've been
Yeah.
afraid. That's how cults operate. That's how autocracies operate. They operate with fear. They use fear as their primary weapon, and that's how they keep people under control.
Mhm. And I would add also they use punishment,
Mhm.
carrot and stick. Let's bring Cynthia Baron back into the conversation um, to pick up on some of these issues. There she is. Um, Cynthia, one of the things that you said at the beginning of your presentation, and uh, Reverend Smith has really embellished into it, is this idea about fear. That the fear that comes out of the kind of terrorism, domestic terrorism that we see. And I'd like to hear both of you talk about how the domestic terrorism attack on our capital last year is a ringing bell for this country, and our realization that that is just the beginning, and how we can begin to have a conversation about the what we see, the depictions in The Handmaid's Tale, especially around female genital mutilation, the colonies, the wall. And Cynthia, I was so glad that you said that made the point that Atwood indicated that all of, because most, uh, the whole section is very white. The book, essentially, the story is very white in terms of who the major characters are. But when you first time I read the book, I was saying, well, what happened to the black people? And Michelle and I have discussed that many times. Well, what happened to the black people? Uh, so let's see if we can't, as we try to draw down on cults, culture, and religion, that how that comes to place when we look at and understand the reality of what happened in our country just a year ago.
I
Cynthia, you want to take a
think
jab at
Susan.
it?
Well, Susan, I think maybe you could start. I want to kind of circle back to some points that you made that I thought were so crucial. And you speak so much more eloquently than me. This is why this is why I should just stay in my little I don't know,
You
by
have a lane
myself.
here.
No,
You have a
you
lane
have
here.
you lots of information, but I think that in terms of what happened last year, which still makes me very angry when I think about it, um, was indicative of um, it's indicative of how close we are to our government actually falling. Um, we were never, the land of the free and the home of the brave. We were the land of the free and the home of the brave for some people, and the fight to make that happen or keep that in place was evident, and the lack of speedy punishment and accountability and that on all of that is another indication of just the inequity that people in power have. They will protect their own. They protect their own. They're protect. If that had been a group of black people or brown people or women, they would have been. We all would have been in jail. Would have been in jail with long sentences a long time ago. But the fact that they have. Just kind of dragging their feet, and people are, getting these light sentences, and even when they're in jail, they get to go home on vacations. Are you kidding me? Or going home for Thanksgiving dinner? I mean, it's all of it, all of it. If people cannot see what's going on, even by watching that, then they're willfully being blind. Do you see? Because it's painful to look at something that's true. That's why I can't watch Handmaid's Tale, because it's painful. People can't watch stories about, there's this thing called Women of the Movement, and it's talking about the lynching of Emmett Till. It's painful to watch that kind of stuff. So I think a lot of people just put their heads in the sand. If I don't see it, then it doesn't exist, which is a very wrong way to be, because if you don't see it, then you can't identify what's going on, then you can't pinpoint what you have to do strategically, not emotionally, but strategically, to address it and to nip it in the bud, or it's out of the bud already, but to nip it so that it doesn't go any further.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you made one of the really important points. You made. May I call you Susan, or should I call you Reverend? Okay.
No. Susan is fine.
You know, bystanders, whoever they might be, don't realize that they'll be next.
Right.
And I think that's such a huge point. And I mean, there, it depending upon, who you were last January, you were either thinking, oh my God, it's The Handmaid's Tale. Right. Or you were like, yeah, this is fun.
Right.
And I mean, the number of comments that, I mean, even semi-mainstream, news people are saying that, it's pretty obvious that if these had been people of color, they would have been loaded into vans, and they would have been shot.
Right.
They would, this is so the I think that if you're anybody's watching is either horrified or they're like, yeah, we get by with whatever we want.
Mm-hmm.
And it's those people who are really don't realize that they could easily be like, expendable. Some of them won't be. Some of them will become, commanders and eyes and, all that sort of thing. But not all of them will.
A lot of them.
A
lot of them won't.
Right,
because that group of people, the oligarchy or the plutocracy or the whatever you call that upper layer, they don't care. They use people. That's part of the cult mentality. They use people, and they're very good at using people and manipulating people to get what they want. And as soon as they have those people have lost their usefulness, they are expendable. And people don't realize it. They think like that lady who was part of the insurrection, that white lady from Texas or somewhere. And she said, I'm not going to get arrested because I'm white and I'm blonde. Okay, white blonde lady, how about this? When it's all said and done, if these people get into power, they're not going to care. If you don't have enough money, if you're not loyal to them, if you don't have something to offer them because their relationships are transactional, then you are horse meat, and they don't realize it. And the other thing they don't do, the people in power, I think people like Bannon and Stephen Miller, I think that they are very, very smart. I think that they are well read. I don't think that many people in that sphere are, but I know people like that are. But they these people have not read. They don't know the cycles of history. They don't know how autocrats have acted in other places. They don't know that. So they don't know that mass graves have been built, have been dug for people who thought that they were rooting for the right side, who thought they were in, that they thought they were like special. You are not special to these people. If you're, and if you're a woman, all right, so let's say you're a blonde woman, you're a blonde white woman, but you can't have babies, katayao. If we go back to Handmaid's Tale, because those women were used because they were useful to the men. If they could not bear kids, they didn't have such a good life. And people don't realize. I wish people would stop being so naive. I wish all of us would stop being so naive and realize what's in front of us. And we don't.
Mm-hmm. To go back to one of your points, I think it's really troubling this circuit of sort of media violence, weapons, and the military. Movies are one of the biggest sources of recruiting military people, because they're like video games, and you're shoot. They're like first person shooter, and the number of people who were there last January who are former military or current military, former police,
law enforcement,
current police, the whole thing. So I think this is a really terrifying sign, and I think Susan, you're so right. I mean, we have been tilting towards this for a very
long time.
It has been a battle, for a long time. And I also want to take your point that, it really should not be called Christian nationalists. I think that's what really struck me from the time I was a little kid. Jesus loves the little children, all the little children of the world. I could never square that with what I was around.
Mm-hmm.
And I still can't. And I still just want to tell them all, just like, how can you call yourself a Christian? How can you? Anyway.
The killing thing is that they do it with abandon. They don't even care, because there's a boldness about the sense of entitlement within the ranks of these people. And it's almost like they challenge God to challenge them. They don't believe they are held accountable by God or by man. They really don't. And so they do what they want, and they don't worry about it. I would worry, from the way I was taught, when I was growing up, about Jesus and God, I would worry if I was doing some of the stuff that that stuff. Love your neighbor. My mom said, I don't care how bad they treat you. You got to love your neighbor. You got to forgive people. Why? Because Jesus said it. I would worry. I would think I was going straight to hell, but they do not, because they have removed Jesus from the gospel, and they have removed the gospel from their declaration of religion. That's probably more accurate.
Yeah. And it's also because it's so backwards, circular or something, because they're well off, they're better off than X, Y, and Z. In some ways, like however they define it, that means that God has smiled upon them.
Right.
And so they're free and clear.
Right.
That's the part that they have their own private, special relationship to God. God talks to them individually and specially, because they are special and they deserve it. And I don't.
Yeah, and
let me ask about something, because we haven't really talked about the colonies that are depicted in the story. And Cynthia, you're going to make me have nightmares, because I figured all the Black people were at the colonies. They're either on the wall. Michelle and I have already decided 2 days into Gilead, we on the wall. But I have been over the 4 years in one series, been comparing the colonies to poor and working poor people who are sent to American colonies that we tolerate, and that's the American prison industrial complex. It's the private prisons. Um, the other is the way in which we take care of seniors who are poor and who have to depend on Medicare, on Medicaid, and disabled people. I mean, in Gilead, in that society, those are all dispensable. So my question becomes for both of you, and I'd like to hear. Michelle has some interesting thoughts about this, and I'm hoping she'll share them. It might is to what extent that we have tolerated human right abuses in this country that takes us to the gates of Gilead, trying to escape to another country in order to survive. That's my question.
Those are a lot of questions.
I tend to do
Do you want
that.
me, do you want me to start? Susan, do you want to jump?
No, you go right
Okay.
ahead. I'm good.
Well, I share your sense that the colonies are the industrial prison system, and that um, you know the really chilling component where it comes so clear is that once we get to right now, I'm blurring. Is it season 3 or 4
4.
where she goes to live with the architect of the economy? What is that? Which season
That's
is that?
season 3.
3, right.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's the one who figured out that, you just, it's, you can't bother. This system cannot support the Gilead system cannot support very many people in the manner to which they want to be, they want to live. So they just jettison the rest of the people. It's like it's an economic decision, which is the same thing as what happens with the prison system. And the people who get jettisoned are the people who are deemed not full human beings by the white men in power. I think that, I was looking through, I had recently in the testaments at the back, there's an interview with Atwood where she has whole lists of newspaper clippings, titles that she was looking at the time. She said before the internet, we had newspapers, and I would just clip, all these titles, and I'd be willing to bet that she came across things that were like the increase in prison systems. In the 1970s and 1980s, because that's when it starts to go into this huge rise.
Yeah, our guest last week suggested that Atwood's vision may ultimately look quaint compared to the technology and surveillance systems that we have available to us today. Um, we are about to close, but I did just want to ask Reverend Sue, and we haven't really had a chance to talk tonight, but I feel like I've gotten to know you so because I've been studying both of your works. And Reverend Sue, I wanted to ask you, I think that you are in good company, perhaps the majority of people who find it really, really difficult to watch like this. But I know from the kind of work you do that, you in real life you deal with very difficult topics. I mean, just the homelessness alone. I'm remembering a story you told about meeting a former NASA
Yeah.
mathematician who was living homeless on the streets. So I know that you have the capacity to confront the real ugliness of reality. But I'm wondering, what you think might help people who really have difficulty um, dealing with the realness of what we're facing here in this country. Um, because going at it direct like this with something like The Handmaid's Tale is not going to reach everybody.
Well, one of the things is different. Let me back into this by saying that, like, people who work with kids all day don't want to work with kids when they get home. They work with them so they don't have to watch kid shows because they're done. Um, I think when you when you when you work with these people, and um, you realize the depth and the breadth of suffering. You see what poverty does to people. You see what sexism does to people. You see what being discriminated against because of your gender or your sexuality. That when you work with people and you have conversations with them, um, when you come home, you don't want to turn on the television and see more of that. You really don't. You want to go home and drink a glass of vodka if you drink. I mean, you just don't want to. Uh, you don't want to do it because it's hard to watch. It's hard to watch. It's hard to watch. It's when we in our ministry we collect socks. We collect socks for the homeless, and the reason we do that is because we don't ever think about how the homeless are on their feet all the time. And it happened a couple of years ago. We were walking around along the streets Thanksgiving Day, and we were giving out dinners that we had prepared and put in bags to take to people who could not go into shelters. And we were also taking socks, and we were at this one homeless enclave, and we gave the dinner, and then we gave the socks, and this guy burst out into tears, and I thought, oh God, what's wrong? And he said, we get trench foot. It just so happened that I had been reading a book by, I think it's Adam Hochschild, I think, about World War One, and he was describing trench warfare. Trench foot. I had just been reading that maybe a week, and when he said we get trench foot, I broke down, um, because that's what I'm talking about. You see it, you hear it, you hear the stories, you hear people who were once living in, who had six figures who are now on the streets. Um, you see women who have been, suffered from domestic violence, living in their car. You see it all, and what happens is that you begin to see, in spite of the fact that sexism and racism and all that stuff it just is totally aggravating and maddening. You are forced to come out of your place of judgment, you know and look at people not as an object but as human beings, and you're forced to have conversations and relationships with people that you normally wouldn't. And I think that what I don't see in The Handmaid's Tale is that type of, that the separation that is required for such a dystopian society to exist is exacerbated, and it is cultivated in that environment because they need for people to be separated, whereas in real life we need for people to be in community. And so that, I see enough of it, Michelle. When I just don't want to see it when I get home. I just don't want to see it. It's just too, and it's scary, because you don't know when these net holes get, in power. When they do, whose door they're gonna knock on? You remember The Sound of
Right.
Music? That girl was in love. Liesel was in love with that little guy, and then Hitler comes and he's a soldier. He's a Nazi, and they have this moment where they recognize each other, and for a second he remembers that he loves her, and then he blows his whistle. We don't know who's going to blow their whistle. We don't know that, so it's too scary to me. I'm a chicken. I admit it. I'm scared of it. I'm afraid of it.
I understand.
Yeah. Well, Cynthia Barron and Reverend Susan K. Smith, thank you so very much for joining us. We're going to have to continue this discussion because I think that there is further depth in this discussion, putting just in the context of we are in America, and that makes me very sad. I've been this since all my adulthood, since I was a student, and it's sad. It's sad for our children, and sad especially for our seniors. I
Hmm.
feel a great amount of grief of what we have lost in the last 25 years. So thank you very much, and we'll see you, Dr. Barron, later on in the series. And Reverend Susan, I'm going to be calling you to join me on Our Common Ground one
Thank
of these
you.
Saturday nights because we like
Thank.
to spend Saturday night with you. Michelle?
Thank you. And just remember, you can subscribe to our website, ifamericafales.live. You can find us on YouTube, the TruthWorks Network YouTube channel. And TruthWorks is also on Facebook. So we look forward to seeing you there
Well, hold on, Michelle. Want to talk about what's happening here at If America Fails
next week.
next week?
Yes, yes.
Um, we're going to be joined by um,
Frank
Frank
Schaefer.
Schaefer. Uh,
Yeah.
and he is an artist, filmmaker, and author. And we hope that you will join us there. Frank is a friend of Our Common Ground for many, many years, as is Reverend Smith. And we have had the opportunity to have here next week's episode 3, American Democracy Under Siege, Sex, Wombs, and God, where he is going to be talking about he'll be talking about his take on his personal history and journey of redemption. And for those of you who want to know more about him, you can go to americafails.live. Michelle, I so enjoyed doing this with you, even though um, we could have hours of this discussion. And one of these episodes, you and I are just gonna, uh, you know, talk about what strikes us uh, about this,
Mhm.
because I know that if Gilead, you will not make it to Canada because you will be doing resistance and activism work, and you will get caught. I will be at the wall proclaiming how this isn't going to be tolerated, and they will shoot me right away.
I'm right
So,
behind you.
and listening to Cynthia and excuse me, Reverend Susan tonight, they'll be right behind us too. because they won't make it. But thank all of you for being with us, and we'll be right back here next Thursday night with Frank Scher. And we hope that you have a good week. We hope for those of you who haven't seen it that you're catching up and can provide us some insight. Don't forget to leave us some comments and feedback, suggestions here at TruthWorks Network.
Seriously? What the actual